In 1845 AD, a two-ship expedition set out on a voyage to the frozen Canadian archipelago. Their goal was to find a passage that would be a shortcut linking the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean via the Canadian North Pole. However, shortly after the start of the voyage, 5 crew members fell ill, and the expedition was forced to leave them on the island in Greenland. The expedition then moved on, consisting of 129 people. They will be seen again later, and for more than a century no one knew the fate of the ships. But in recent decades we have begun to know what happened and what happened to them. It turned out to be more terrifying than one place. Anyone can imagine the people of your father, and come, I will tell you today about the Lost Franklin expedition. But before we start, do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell to receive a notification of the new story every week, and let the video reach 20,000 likes before the next episode. Are you with me? With the beginning of the 19th century and the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the door of exploration was wide open, especially with the emergence of steam engines. And for the first time in human history, the map of the world was almost complete in 1845. Explorers had covered almost all corners of the Earth, except for a small area, which had not yet been discovered, a coastal strip of about 1,600 kilometers in length in the Canadian Arctic, a place many explorers devoted their entire lives to discovering, the Northwest Passage. But this discovery will not come easily and will be a graveyard for a large number of British sailors. During this period, England and the other great powers were trying to expand their influence in every part of the world. Of course, this expansion was by sea, but they were always confronted. The problem with the Americas was that they created a natural sea barrier. Since the Panama Canal did not exist yet, this meant that ships had to take the long route around South America and then return again in the Pacific Ocean, or go from the other side of the world. Either way, the long way by all standards, if we find a shortcut, the journey from England to China will be much shorter, which means more trade and much higher profits. This made the discovery of a shortcut a very important goal for the Royal Navy. And for this reason, in the early 19th century, the Navy launched a large group of expeditions in an attempt to chart this route. But none of them reached what they were looking for in the middle of the 19th century. The Royal Navy decided to make a final attempt, an expedition heading west towards the Lancaster Strait, and then heading south for a distance of about 1,640 kilometers. A very difficult journey, but whoever succeeds in it will achieve fame and glory. But who would this honor go to? The Navy was unable to make a decision. Sir John Barrow, a senior naval officer in charge of preparing the expedition, was 82 years old and wanted to end his journey with a great achievement. Lady, but who could lead an expedition with such difficulty? The first person he thought of was the famous polar explorer, Sir William Edward Barry. Captain Barry was born in Wales in 1790 AD and held the record in 1827 for the farthest point reached by an explorer in the north. During his service in the Navy, he made 4 different expeditions to the North Pole, but when Sir Barrow was offered to lead the expedition, he declined the offer, saying that he was tired of the North Pole. The second choice that came to Sir Barrow's mind was Sir Captain Ross was born in 1800 AD and was also a polar explorer like Captain Barry. Over 50 years of service in the Royal Navy, he made 6 expeditions to the North Pole and 1 to the South Pole. But when Sir Barrow offered him the command of the expedition, he refused the offer and replied that he was still married, and promised his wife that he would never go on any more dangerous expeditions to the North Pole. The third choice was a young captain named James Fayed Shams, and at first glance it seemed like a strange choice. James was born in 1813 AD, meaning he was 31 years old. But when Sir Barrow decided to choose him to command the expedition, yes, James was a distinguished naval officer and joined the Navy when he was only 12 years old, and rose through the ranks quickly due to his intelligence and boldness. But some people say that this is not the reason for his rapid promotions. While James was in Singapore, he met George Barrow, the son of the great Sir Barrow, who is not exactly known. What happened there? But what happened was that James paid people money to cover up something he did. George, something that if it had been known would have embarrassed his father, Sir Barrow, and so Sir Barrow took it to him beautifully and helped him to quickly rise to prestigious positions in the Navy, to the point that he reached the rank of ship commander when he was only 29 years old. And despite the clear mediation from Sir Barrow to James, the Navy refused to let him be the leader of the expedition, and their argument was that he did not have enough experience. The next choice was Captain Francis Kruger. Kruger was born to a simple family in Ireland in 1796 and was a close friend of Captain Ross and Captain Kruger, like the one before him. He was an Arctic explorer. Over the course of 38 years of service in the Navy, he led 6 expeditions to the North and South Poles. Kruger was very suitable to lead this expedition, but there was one obstacle that made the Navy reject the choice. He was Irish, and he was from a simple family, not from the aristocracy. The British did not want the man who would draw the last point on the world map, open the most important sea lane, and and gained this honor to be Irish, so they decided to make him the assistant commander. But who would be the commander? The fifth choice was Sir John Franklin, Captain Franklin. At the time, he was 59 years old and had been serving in the Navy for 45 full years. He was born in 1786 to a well-off family, and he was the only one of his brothers who joined the Navy and kept rising in the ranks year after year while participating in many battles, the most famous of which are the First World War, the French Revolution, the Napoleonic War, and the War of 1812. He also participated in 2 major polar expeditions before that, but unfortunately, the thing he was most famous for was the manga expedition from Hassa in 1819. It failed miserably, and resulted in the deaths of 11 out of 20 of his men. Most of those who died of starvation, and those who survived lived because they ate their own boots. And for this reason, Franklin became known as the man who ate his own boots. But despite this, Franklin was known among his men as a religious and kind man who cared for them. And this expedition was a golden opportunity for Franklin to correct the mistakes of the past. And, accordingly, he accepted the offer. The search for a leader for the expedition ended, and the Royal Navy finally settled on Sir John Franklin as the leader of the expedition, and Francis Kruger would be the second in command, who would lead, and finally James Fitz would be the third in command, who would lead. The ships they chose for the expedition were the best ships for the mission, the flagship. It was a Heckler-class battleship specially modified for Arctic expeditions. It was built in 1826, and its length was meter and 9 meters wide, and its crew consisted of 67 sailors, and the other ship was a bit older than it, built in 1813 as a combat ship of the class, and its size and armament were not very good for the ship. These 2 ships were chosen in particular because combat ships are equipped to fire heavy mortars, and for this reason, their hull is stronger than regular ships, and this allows them to withstand sailing in the middle of the Arctic ice better. In addition, the ships were equipped with the latest technology available. At that time, they were the first ships in the entire Royal Navy to operate with steam engines. They were equipped with a steam engine with a power of 25 horsepower, capable of propelling the ship at a speed of 4 knots, or 8 kilometers per hour. The clock, and in addition to that, the copper fans connected to the engine were designed so that they could be disassembled and flushed inside the ship's hull, and thus they could protect the fan from ice if necessary. As for the steam pipes that were connected to the engine, they were distributed throughout the ship so that they could be used at the same time as a central heating system. These engines needed about a ton of fresh water at 1 o'clock, and accordingly, we needed another piece of equipment to be present on the ship, which is seawater desalination equipment, from which we provide fresh water for the steam engine, and from which we provide fresh water for the ship's crew to drink as they wanted. As for the ship's body itself, it was reinforced with iron plates installed on the bow and in the middle, and the thickness of the ship's hull itself was doubled. You could say that the ships were like a space shuttle for that era. They had the latest and the best technology available at the time. On 19 May 1000 AD 45, the expedition set off on its long journey, carrying 134 people with provisions that would suffice for all members of the expedition for 3 full years, 2 tons of tobacco, 7,500 liters of alcoholic beverages, and a library containing 1,200 books. The most important thing that modern technology provided them was canned food. 60,000 cans of preserved food. And for the first time, all the food that the sailors would have was canned food. The supplies would suffice them for 3 full years, and could suffice them for 5 more years if they reduced the rations for each person. The expedition moved from London north to Scotland, and then crossed the Atlantic Ocean to the Whaling Islands on the west coast of Greenland. But before the expedition reached Greenland, 5 members of the crew fell ill and were unable to complete the journey. Accordingly, they were released, and the 5 countries were the ones who actually escaped. In the few days they stayed on the island, the crew members wrote their last letters to their families in England, and in general, the whole crew was excited. They were about to start the most important they had done in their lives, a journey that would immortalize their name in history. And the truth be told, it did. It immortalized their name in history, but not for the reason they thought. On July 12, 1845, the expedition set off with 129 people on board, and 2 weeks later, a group of whalers saw them in Baffin Bay, and this was the last time anyone saw the ships of the expedition or the men on them. Sailing in the Arctic is slower than anywhere else in the world. Even in summer, the canals and waterways are full, and the ships need to keep pushing giant blocks of ice out of their way as they sail. This must happen very slowly. If the ship moves quickly while doing this, it is very easy for these blocks to break the front of the ship and sink the entire ship over time. Because of this slowness, the mission in the first year covered about 800 kilometers, only going around an island, but they did not find a passage in this place. In the end, they returned to Beachy Island with the onset of winter, meaning about 350 kilometers away from the bay of the point from which they originally started. However, they considered the first year of achievement to be good. Thus, we learned that the area above has no passages, and because winter in the Arctic freezes the seawater, they all took refuge in a small bay between Beachy Island and Berry Island. When the water froze, the ship's crew lowered the sails and covered the entire ship from above with a cloth cover and surrounded the sides of the ship with snow to insulate it. This is how they were able to. A little warm weather to spend the winter until summer comes and the snow melts and they can continue their journey. Morale was very high during the winter. They had made good progress before the water froze, and they had plenty of food and drink and were not worried about anything. In the first winter of 1845 to 46, 3 of the crew members died and were buried on Beachy Island. Their bodies were found in the 1880s, and they were amazingly preserved for more than a century because of the ice. When the bodies were examined, it became clear that the cause of death was tuberculosis, but that was not the only reason. There is another important reason that we will know in a little while. The 5 men who got tired and we left them, it turned out that they were also infected with tuberculosis, meaning that tuberculosis was widespread among the members of the expedition from the beginning, and tuberculosis at that stage was a deadly disease because the vaccines that are currently used had not yet been discovered. With the melting of the ice in the spring, the ships were freed from the ice and the expedition began its journey south towards the island that was then known as King William's Land. It was an area of land on the edge of the areas discovered at the time, and they did not know at the time that it was an island. When they reached the fork in the road at William Frank Strait, Link had 2 choices: head south in the hope that it was indeed an island, and there would be a place below from which they could cross, or head west in the hope that they would cross the strait before winter. Franklin did not want to risk going down to the south and finding the road blocked, forcing them to go back north and then start their way west, so he decided to head west all the way. And this was the biggest mistake he made. The area they entered west of King William Island was the most dangerous water in the whole area, an area of water with several channels that they would empty into at the same time, and the snow would collect in it in huge quantities. And before they could adjust their course and get out of this predicament, they were trapped because of a lot, and it froze. The ships came near the west coast of King William Island, and there they would spend the second winter from 1846 to 1847. And what they did not know was that this winter would be the beginning of the real tragedy. Unfortunately for them, the winter of 1846 and the years that followed were among the coldest years that had passed in the North Pole. And the shock was that the ice around King William Island did not melt in the summer. At this time, in January 1847, Lady Franklin's legacy, Sir Franklin, was beginning to worry greatly. The mission was expected to last 1 year, and we had 2 full years, so she went to the Navy and started. She began to ask them to launch a search and rescue campaign to look for the mission, but the Navy saw no problem. It was normal for a mission whose expected duration was 1 year to last 2 years, and the evidence was that the mission was originally equipped with 3 years' worth of supplies. But the Navy was not convinced by this talk, and launched a wide media campaign in which it used all its knowledge to pressure the Navy. And although the Navy did not know at the time, the mission was really in need of rescue. The second reason that we mentioned will be discussed in a bit more is the food. The canned food that they had with them on the trip was not well packaged. The company that was responsible for the packaging had signed a contract to fill 10,000 cans in just 7 weeks, and the technology at the time did not allow for that. In addition, they won the bid because they offered a low price for the cans and were able to offer that price because the cans were of poor quality and the lead protector that was used to seal the cans leaked into the food and contaminated all the food with lead. In addition, some of the parameters were not cooked properly, and although the crew at this stage did not know that the food was causing food poisoning for many of the crew members, and the bad luck did not stop there, the pipes used in the water desalination system were also lined with lead, and when this lead was exposed to seawater, it began to corrode and settle in the water they were drinking from. And what made the mud worse was that sailors for hundreds of years used lemon juice bottles to fight scorpion, a disease that was very famous among sailors due to the lack of vitamin C, because they lived at sea for months and sometimes for years, far from fruits and vegetables. But this time, with the technology that led them to disaster, they did not take any bottles of lemon juice with them. As usual, they took canned vegetables and fruits with them and said that this way we would not need lemon lemon juice. With the poor packaging, the vegetables and fruits lost their effectiveness over time. Maybe the sailors did not feel this in the first year, or maybe the second year as well, but we have already entered the third year. On 28th of May, 1847 AD, the leaders of the expedition sent a team on sleds to the shore of King William Island. There, they left 2 letters in 2 piles of stones for people who came after them to find the letters. The letters were simple and direct. They wrote their route so far, the location of the ships, and that Captain Franklin was still the commander, and that everything was fine. But after these letters, a little bit. Nothing will be fine. It is clear that they thought that the snow would melt, and they would start to complete their journey. But in 1847 and 1848, the snow did not melt in June, July, or even August, and the ships remained stuck during this period. And in this long winter that never ends, the ship began to sink into the ice solidly, and most of its crew moved to the ship Erebus with the rest of their colleagues to warm up each other and reduce the consumption of the food they had left. As for the ship Terrier, they began to use it as a refrigerator for the extra equipment they had with them, and for the Spy, which began to increase day after day. On June 11th, 1000 AD, 847, Captain John Franklin died. Finally, in 1847 to 1848, the Navy began to move. The media campaign had been running for a year, accusing the Navy of negligence, something, and that's why it was necessary to act. At the beginning of 1848, the search and rescue campaign was launched. They entered the area from both sides, from the Atlantic Ocean and from the Pacific Ocean. James Ross, one of the candidates who refused to lead the expedition because he was still a newlywed, went out in this search campaign, but this time he went out. The search in an attempt to rescue Francis Kruger, the close friend of the day, on April 22nd, 1000 AD, 848, after 18 whole months locked in their place, unable to move. Captain Kruger, who took command after the death of Captain Franklin, decided to abandon the ships and try his luck on land, rather than sit on the ship and die one after the other and 104 crew members. They put small boats on the sleds and loaded all their supplies on them. Their journey south to King William Island, the plan was, they would reach the Back River 240 kilometers away, and when they got there, they would get into the boats they had and go to the nearest trading post. And on April 25th, they reached the stone piles where they had left the letters, and they adjusted the letters, and they became as follows. They wrote in them the ship and the ship Erebus. They were abandoned on April 22nd, 30 kilometers northwest of this point, after they were surrounded. New from 12/9/1000 AD, 46 and 80 to date, and the crew now consists of 105 individuals under the command of Captain Kruger, and the total deaths so far are Captain Franklin, and 9 officers and 15 individuals signed. James Fed Shams, captain of the Erebus. The overland journey began, and the men began to pull sleds weighing more than 3 tons, some on ice and some on rocks in freezing temperatures. The situation was the worst possible. All the men were suffering from general weakness due to malnutrition and lead poisoning, and many of them were dying slowly from scurvy. And throughout the journey that they had planned, every now and then someone was dying. At first, when someone died, they would put him on the boat on the sleds, but this increased the burden on the rest. Imagine that. People with food poisoning, lead poisoning, and scurvy. This is in addition to those who are infected with tuberculosis and are forced to walk 240 kilometers in the middle of the snow. And not only that, they are required to pull boats weighing more than 3 tons and do not tell them to leave them. They cannot abandon them because they will need them if they succeed in reaching the river one after the other. The men decided that whoever gets tired and cannot continue will be left in a tent and leave with him some food and a desperate promise. One day, they will return to him. In addition, there were small groups that separated from the large group. We do not know if they separated on purpose or if the large group abandoned them or got lost from each other because of the icy weather. What we know is that more than 20 bodies were found along the coast of King William Island, and bodies were found in more than 12 different places. And in the year 1850 and 50 groups, who are they? The Eskimo people? They found an abandoned ship. It was later confirmed that it was either Erebus or Tyre. When they entered it, they found a group of dead people in their beds. This news made the researchers believe that a group of those who had been separated returned to the ship again and decided that it was better for them to die in it than to die in the middle of the snow. When the Eskimos were asked about the expedition, they gave extremely destructive testimonies. They said that they saw a group of men eating human flesh. They were eating the dead of their colleagues, and that they found a mass grave with more than 30 bodies, all of which had signs of mutilation, indicating that their colleagues had eaten them after they died. Of course, when the British Navy heard about this, they completely rejected the idea and said that these are liars and savages, and that the civilized British would never do such a thing. In August of the year 1800, 50 search parties will find the graves of the 3 who were buried on Beachy Island at the beginning of the trip, and then they were sure that something had happened to the mission. And after this discovery, the search and rescue campaign became more important than discovering the passage itself, and more than 10 ships went out in a search and rescue operation for the lost Franklin expedition, and several of the rescue ships will be exposed to similar accidents throughout the movie. The amazing thing is that one of these ships is the ship. Under the command of Captain Robert McClure, they will find the Northwest Passage by chance, and they are looking for the expedition, but it will also be trapped in the ice, and its crew will abandon it after 2 years. And in the year 1853, its crew will meet the crew of another ship that was also trapped in the ice, and together they will reach safety throughout the year. And on 31st of March, 2000 AD and 854, the British Navy, all members of the expedition announced they died while performing their service. In 1993, 145 years after the beginning of the search, the big shock happened. The last camp of the Bath men on the island was found, and when the researchers examined it, the subject of cannibalism was confirmed, which the Inuits said they found the remains of human bones with cuts indicating that someone had tried to extract the marrow from inside them. Finally, in 2014, the shipwreck was discovered, but the condition of the ship was completely deteriorated. But 2 years later, the ship was found as well, and the strange irony is that it was found in the Gulf of the Gulf called Sharfie A, after her, without anyone knowing that it had sunk. But the amazing thing is that this ship was in excellent condition, and the initial dives had revealed a huge group of artifacts. But in 2020, the whole thing was suspended due to Corona. In May 2022, the research team returned to complete the work, and perhaps in the coming years, new details will be revealed to us about what happened to the ill-fated Franklin mission. And so we have reached the end of the story. I am waiting for your opinion. If you have a story you want us to tell you, write it in the comments. The idea that I find the most interaction with, I will choose it and make a great video about it. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share the video with anyone you think will like it. And I will see you next time with a story that is more exciting than the one before. Bye.